My dear students, welcome back. And my dear and respected viewers, also welcome back to the session number 11 on the subject business regulations. And the topic for this session is consideration. We'll discuss the meaning of consideration, legal rules relating to the consideration, and the exceptions to the general rule of the consideration. In the previous discussion, various essentials of a valid contract, consideration, the presence of consideration is also been discussed. Like offer, acceptance, consideration is also an essential element of a valid contract. So that's why the general rule is that no consideration, no contract. So the availability or presence of consideration, existence of consideration in case of agreements and contracts is a must to make a contract or an agreement valid one, legally binding one. So now let us discuss about the consideration. Meaning of consideration. Consideration, in simple, we can say it is a value given in exchange for a promise. It is a value given in exchange for a promise. So, as it was told, it is one of the most important essentials of a valid contract. According to section 25 of the Act, no consideration, no contract. It means without consideration, contract becomes void. So, existence of consideration is very, very important. This has been observed by Calcutta High Court relating to the case of Fazluddin versus Panchamam Das. The court says consideration is the price of a promise, a return, or quid pro quo, something of value received by the promisee or inducement of the promise. So, this observation of the Calcutta High Court clearly states that consideration is an important aspect of a valid contract. It is the price of a promise, a return, or quid pro quo, something of value received by the promisee as inducement of the promise. Section 2, subsection D of the Act defines the term consideration as when, at the desire of the promiser, the promisee or any other person has done or abstained from doing or does or abstain from doing or promises to do or to abstain from doing something, such act or abstinence or promise is called consideration for the promise. ಸೊ ಆತ್ಮೀಯ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳೇ, ಈ ಡೆಫಿನೇಷನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಮಗೆ 3 ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಅಂಶಗಳನ್ನ ಕಂಡು ಬರ್ತವೆ. ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಗಮನಿಸಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ದ ಡೆಫಿನೇಷನ್ ರಿವೀಲ್ಸ್ 3 ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಕಾಂಪೋನೆಂಟ್ಸ್. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಒನ್, ದಿ ಆಕ್ಟ್ ಆರ್ ಅಬ್ಸ್ಟಿನೆನ್ಸ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ಡನ್ ಅಟ್ ದ ಡಿಸೈರ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸರ್. Promiser's desire for the consideration is very, very important. The act or abstinence should be done at the behest, at the desire of the promiser. Means no other person is entitled, no other person is authorized to determine, to fix, to decide about the consideration. It must be done at the desire of the promisor alone. Then the second component, the act or abstinence should be done by the promisee or any other person. Means the consideration need not come from the promisee only. It can be from any other person who is acting for and on behalf of the promisee. It's not like that directly the consideration should be paid, should be discharged by the promisee. It can be any other person whom he has authorized, whom he has permitted. Then the third component, the act or abstinence has been already done or remains to be done. Means the consideration may be past, present, or future consideration. Okay, so the act or abstinence has been already done or remains to be done. Then legal rules. Legal rules relating to the consideration. What law says as far as the term consideration is concerned? What are the various legal implications? What are the legal aspects available for the consideration? First one, it must be done at the desire of the promisor. Consideration is always determined, consideration is always fixed by, decided by the promisor. No other person, as I told, no other person is entitled or authorized to determine the consideration. The value in exchange must be at the desire of the promisor. The second element, it may move from the promisee or any other person. Consideration need not be personally come from the promisee, need not be personally discharged by the promisee alone. It can be from any other person who is acting for the promisee, who is acting on behalf of the promisee. So it may move from the promisee or any other person. It may be an act or abstinence. Means consideration may be in the form of doing something or not doing something. That is abstinence. So it may be doing something or not doing something as per the desire of the promisor. Then it may be past, present, or future. It may be past, present, or future. Consideration. For example, if a person has rendered services in the month of December 2020, for which the person has promised to pay in the month of February. So, for the past services rendered, if the consideration is paid or payable, then that is also acceptable and valid one. So, it may be past. Then present. Present consideration means for the present event, the present transaction, the present dealing. If a person is selling, say, goods worth rupees 1000 and the buyer is paying for that, paying the same amount, then this is a present transaction and present consideration. Future, future consideration. Consideration can also be a future one. Say a person agrees to sell goods in the month of March and the buyer agrees to make the payment in the month of April. If both the parties agreed for it, seller is selling the goods in the month of March and buyer is paying for it in the month of April, then it is a valid consideration. So consideration may be past, present, or future. Then it need not be adequate. It need not be adequate. Means the adequacy of consideration cannot be determined. It is all at the desire of the promisor. It is all at the desire, at the behest of the promisor. The seller goods worth rupees 1000, he can sell for 10 rupees also. He can sell for 100 rupees also. So it is very, very difficult to decide about the adequacy of the consideration. It is all up to the behest of the desire. It is all up to the agreement between the parties. Then it must be real and not illusory one. The consideration must be real. But practically, it should be a real one so that it can be discharged. It is the consideration is possibly to be exchanged. That type of consideration must be decided, and it should not be illusory. Kalpanika consideration avakasha illa. So it should not be an illusory one. Then discharging of a pre-existing obligation is no consideration. Pre-existing, the obligation for which a person is already liable, then if he is discharging that obligation, then no consideration is required for it. So if a person is discharging for which he is already liable, then no consideration is required. Then it should not be illegal or immoral. Legality of consideration is also very, very important to be considered. Consideration should be fully legal. It should not be in any way, it should not be unlawful, or it should not be immoral or unethical. It should not be against the principles of the society. It should not be against the interest of the nation. So the consideration should be fully legal one and fully based on the moral values and ethics. So the consideration should not be illegal or immoral. So these are the rules relating to the consideration. Then exceptions to the rule: no consideration, no contract. In the beginning, I told, according to section 25 of the Act, if there is no consideration, the contract is void. That means the general rule is no consideration, no contract. So the presence of consideration is very essential for a valid contract. But there are some cases, there are some types of agreements or contracts in which consideration is not essential. Without consideration also, such contracts can be valid. Which are those? An agreement made on account of natural love and affection. An agreement between the persons entered purely based on the natural love and affection. In such type of agreement or contract, consideration is not an essential condition. Like if father has done something, if father has made an agreement for his children out of love and affection, then consideration is not required. Similarly, if children has entered into an agreement with his father out of love and affection, then also consideration is not an essential requirement. Then for past voluntary services rendered, if a person has rendered voluntary services in the previous period in the past, then also the consideration is not essential one. Then for the payment of time barred debt, also no consideration is required. Then to create agency, for the creation of agency also consideration is not required. Like agency contracts creates the relationship like principal and agent. So for creating such a relationship, principal and agent relationship between the persons, consideration is not required. Then in case of gifts, as you know, there are two parties, donor and donee. So the gifts are exchanged out of personal considerations, out of love, affection. So in that case also, in case of gifts also, no consideration is required. So students, these are the 5 types of agreements or contracts where consideration is not an essential condition. Means in these 5 types of contracts, without consideration also, they are valid. Such contracts are valid. Thank you very much for watching, for listening to me in this session number 11 on the topic consideration. Thank you.